Roberto Minczuk, music director of the New Mexico Philharmonic. Welcome to the first Music with the Maestro of the season. Hard to believe.
I know. It's great to be back, Brent. Thank you for having me.
This concert is, there's some interesting connections. First, between Carl Maria von Weber and Mendelssohn. Both of these works were their final major works of their lives. Weber's Oberon Overture. He traveled to London and even learned English to be able to create this work, and then nearly killed himself writing it.
No, it was really an overwhelming task for him. And, after the success of their Freischütz, Weber, he became so famous and so popular. I mean, much more popular in his time than he is nowadays. His operas are still... they are produced in Europe, mainly in Germany and Austria, but they don't get to be heard very often in this country.
He's really considered the first German romantic opera composer who led the way to Mahler and everyone that followed him, right?
Exactly, and Wagner. Even if you hear Weber's music, and you even some popular themes in Wagner. You see where Wagner was inspired from. Sometimes he would take literally an entire theme from Weber and use it, as his own music. So he was really considered one of the most important musicians and composers in the beginning of the Romantic period.
The second work on the program is Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, which, although he seemed to struggle with it for about 6 years, it immediately entered the repertoire as one of the great violin concertos of all time. Tell me about some of the innovations that he brought to the concerto form.
Well, the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is a concerto that became so popular because the melodies are so catchy. They're so... they're so easy to whistle or to sing. Mendelssohn for me is one of the most underrated composers of all time. As we know, he died at a very young age in his early 30s. But I consider his talent almost as important as that of Mozart. I mean, he was composing great masterpieces at such a young, early stage of his life when he was a young man. For instance, he composed Midsummer Night's Dream when he was only 17 years old. So Mendelssohn was this prolific. I mean, he wrote symphonies, concerti, oratorios, and all great music. You wouldn't find anything less than great in Mendelssohn's compositions. His Violin Concerto is innovative in the form that all three movements they have no intermission. They don't stop. They're all connected. He connects the first to the second and to the third movements, and as a unity. And that was quite different for that time, where you really had entirely separate movements for symphonies or for concertos. So Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto gives that sense of unity from the first to the last note of the piece. Very virtuosistic, beautiful cadenzas, beautiful melodies, as we mentioned, and also beautiful orchestral writing. The music of Mendelssohn is it's very classical in the sense. I mean, often you will hear the elements from Mozart and Haydn compositions, but because of the elegance. But he is there already with the harmony and how he develops the themes and how virtuosistic the music is. It's already, considered romantic music. I had the privilege of being a musician. I was a French horn player in the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra,
which was Mendelssohn's orchestra, and the concertmaster of which was the man he composed this concerto for.
Exactly. So the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra carries this tradition of Mendelssohn being there, being one of the first maestros of this orchestra. I mean, certainly one of the most important ones that developed the orchestra in the tradition, so much so. And Leipzig is also the city of Bach, of Schumann lived in Leipzig, and Brahms was a frequent guest. Many of his works were premiered by the Gewandhaus Orchestra, so there's this wonderful sense of tradition. There's a wonderful museum in Mendelssohn's house where he lived and where he died, which is the Mendelssohn Museum. It is a beautiful place to visit and to be acquainted with Mendelssohn's work, his lifestyle, even his paintings are there.
That's right. He was
in the
quite
walls.
a fine artist, actually,
Right.
as well. Did his being a conductor of that orchestra help him grow as a composer? Was part of why he was so innovative and the orchestrations are so rich because he had that group to work with all the time and knew what the sound of it was?
Absolutely. I think Mendelssohn, he was also a pioneer in conducting, because up until then, conductors would be either the leader, the violinist, the concertmaster that would lead from his chair, or the composers themselves would lead their own works. But Mendelssohn could be considered like the first full-time conductor. He really developed that role of the Kapellmeister and the conductor. So we owe it a lot to him. And he was a very elegant man. He would wear white gloves when he conducted and had a beautiful white baton made from ivory. And so it was. So he was a man that contributed a lot, not only as a composer, but to the whole role of a conductor, and the music industry owes a lot to Mendelssohn.
Now, Mendelssohn's output, if limited, was because of his short lifetime. The last piece on the program is by Johannes Brahms, and if his output is limited, it's because he destroyed so much of his work and was such a perfectionist. He took 20 years to write his first symphony or more, then composed another one in a year, then took 6 years, during which time, I think, what did he write? His violin concerto, the Tragic Overture, his concerto, Piano Concerto No. 2, and then he comes to his third and fourth symphonies, again within a year of each other. So this is mature Brahms, the Symphony No. 4. What do we see in him at this point?
Well, we see a man that was one of the most incredible musicians of all time, that was born into a tradition of great music coming from Hamburg, Germany, and knowing profoundly the works of his predecessors, particularly the works of Ludwig van Beethoven, whom he revered so much. And that's why it took so long for Mendelssohn to write a symphony, because he could not see himself writing a symphony, or anybody for that matter, after the great Ninth Symphony of Beethoven.
Brahms, you said Mendelssohn, but
Oh, sorry.
Brahms. Yeah, he lived in Beethoven's shadow so much of his life.
Exactly. So Brahms was afraid of writing a symphony, and not withstanding the comparison with Beethoven. So that's why he waited so long, and he only wrote 4 symphonies. As you mentioned, he destroyed most or a lot of his compositions because he didn't consider them masterworks, and we all are very sorry that he destroyed these works. Who knows what wonderful masterpieces we would have today if he was not such a perfectionist. But the 4th Symphony is really considered one of the greatest symphonies of all times. You often research and greatest symphonies, and Brahms' 4th will be among the best of the symphonies. It's a symphony that's so dramatic. It's full of everything. It really represents the life, the experience. All of Brahms' gratitude to to what he was, his talent, the privilege of being, such a great musician and being recognized as such. Germany at that time was almost divided between followers of Brahms and followers of Richard Wagner. So what a privilege to be among one of the main voices of music history right at that time. A lot of people were, luckily today we don't have to choose one or another. We enjoy both of them equally. Wagner, of course, dedicated himself fully to opera. He built his own opera house, his own temple. Brahms followed the footsteps of Beethoven with symphonic music, with solo piano works, with chamber music, and he did it brilliantly. The Fourth Symphony is really a symphony that we artists, musicians, love to perform. He writes so beautifully for each individual part in the orchestra that everybody has a feeling that their part is the most important one. The violas feel that way, the third horn feels that way, the trombones feel that way, the second violins. So it's really, I think no other composer has achieved such a balance in writing so beautifully for every instrument of the orchestra.
Is that where you have your work cut out for you, is finding the balance that Brahms intended as opposed to the balance that everybody wants to just throw out there?
Absolutely. That's the difficult part. I mean, the good part is that the musicians are always so inspired to play Brahms that so it's they play it with so much inspiration, with so much joy. And Brahms' music it's very profound, because even if you didn't listen to it, if you only analyze the score, it would already be a masterpiece just by looking at the notes and how he works the themes and how the harmony functions and the counterpoint, and so brilliant, how he presents new ideas. So it's a music that is great for the soul, for the ears, for the heart, and for your intellect as well.